He didn't even look up when she walked in. That was the part Elena Vale would remember longest, not the lipstick on his collar, not the texts she'd read by accident, when his phone lit up on the kitchen counter at midnight, not even the name Celeste, typed out in ways a man only types a woman's name when he thinks no one is watching. What she would remember, in the years that followed, was that Dante Vercelli didn't even look up from his glass when his wife of 14 years walked into his study at 2:13 in the morning with the truth written across her face. He swirled his bourbon. He glanced at the window. He said, "You're up late," like she'd come down for water. If you've ever loved someone who made you feel invisible in your own home, stay with me. Because this story is about what happens when the woman who held everything together finally decides to put it down. Before we go further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because we drop stories like this every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Drop a like if you're already feeling this one, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The Vercelli house on North Burling Street was the kind of place that looked like old money from the outside and felt like a controlled silence on the inside. 3 stories of limestone and dark wood, high ceilings that swallowed sound, rooms that had been decorated by someone with excellent taste and occupied by people who'd long since stopped noticing them. The furniture was expensive. The art was real. The flowers on the entry table were changed every Tuesday by a woman named Rosa, who had worked for Elena for 11 years, and who always left a small extra stem, a single white freesia, because she knew Elena liked them, even though Elena had only mentioned it once, years ago in passing. That was the thing about Elena Vale. People remembered what she said, not because she said it loudly. She had met Dante when she was 26 and finishing a graduate degree in nonprofit law. He was 31. Already running the Vercelli family's operations under the cover of a commercial real estate firm, already wearing the kind of suits that didn't come off a rack, already carrying the particular stillness of a man who had learned that the less he moved, the more people paid attention to him. She'd been at a fundraiser for a children's hospital a friend had dragged her. She hadn't wanted to go, and Dante had walked across the room toward her, like the room had narrowed to a single point. He hadn't used a line. He just looked at her and said, "You're the only person in here who looks like she's actually thinking." She should have walked away. She knew that now. Not because of what he was, she hadn't known then. Not fully, but because of how that sentence made her feel. Like being seen after a long time in the dark. She married him 2 years later. Her mother had concerns she never voiced directly. Her father had shaken Dante's hand at the engagement dinner and said, very quietly, "She is not a woman you waste." Dante had nodded. He'd meant it, in that moment. Elena had believed he meant it always. 14 years. 2 miscarriages she'd mostly grieved alone. Because Dante didn't know how to sit with grief, he only knew how to fix things. And when something couldn't be fixed, he went quiet in a way that felt like abandonment. 4 relocations. 11 charity galas she'd organized under the Vercelli Foundation banner. 43 employees across their legitimate businesses who knew her name, who called her when they had problems, who brought her their kids' school fundraiser sheets, because she always bought something. A family trust she'd restructured twice to keep it clean, to keep the legal side legal, to make sure that whatever Dante did in the dark, the daylight parts of their life were something she could stand behind. She'd known. Not everything, but enough. You can love someone and know the shape of what they're hiding without ever saying it out loud. There's a particular loneliness in that carrying the knowledge and still setting his coffee out in the morning. Still sitting beside him at events and smiling at people who feared him, still being a Elena Vercelli in rooms where that name meant something dangerous and something respectable at the same time. She had told herself she stayed because leaving would be complicated. She had told herself she stayed because she believed, somewhere beneath everything, that Dante loved her in the only way he knew how. She had told herself a lot of things, the way you do when the truth is too heavy to carry straight. Then she'd picked up his phone. It wasn't dramatic. There was no instinct, no suspicion spike. His phone had buzzed on the counter. She'd glanced over to see if it was Marcus, his lieutenant, who called at odd hours when something needed handling, and the screen had shown a name, Celeste, and beneath it 3 words visible in the preview before the screen dimmed. "I miss you." 3 words. That was all it took for 14 years to reorganize themselves into a different shape. She'd set his phone back down exactly where it had been. She'd finished making his coffee. She'd gone upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for 2 hours and 40 minutes, not crying, just thinking, reconstructing. The late nights she'd accepted without question. The way he'd started closing his office door. The trip to Miami in April that he'd said was business, that she'd believed because she'd always believed him, because she'd built her entire life on the foundation of believing him. She went to her desk in the small room she kept as her private office. Dante had called it her hobby room once, early on, and she'd never corrected him out loud, filed it away. And she spent the rest of the night pulling documents she'd been slowly, quietly organizing for the past 3 years. Not in anticipation of this specific night. In anticipation of the fact that she'd always known, somewhere in the part of herself she kept very still and very private, that there would eventually be a night like this. She had what she needed in a single leather bag, not her largest, not packed with everything she owned, just the essentials plus the documents. Then she'd walk downstairs. Dante was in his study, bourbon in hand, eyes on the window. He didn't look up. "You're up late." Elena stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked at him, really looked, the way you look at something you're about to put down, after carrying it too long. The lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when they met. The way his jaw still did that thing when he was sitting with a problem, that slight tension at the hinge. He was still objectively a handsome man. He would probably always be that. It had nothing to do with anything. She walked to the side table near the window, where she usually set her keys. She removed her wedding ring, the one he'd replaced twice over the years, each upgrade a gesture she'd accepted as love, which she now understood had been more about what a man like Dante needed his wife to look like than about her. She set it on the table. Not thrown, not dramatic. Set, the way you set something down when you're done with it. Dante watched that. For the first time since she'd walked in, he actually watched. "Elena, I won't compete anymore." She picked up her bag from where she'd set it by the door. She walked out. He didn't follow. Later, this was something she'd think about, not with bitterness, but with a kind of flat clarity. Later, she understood that Dante hadn't followed because he hadn't believed she meant it. In 20 years of operating in a world where people said things they didn't mean, where threats were made and rescinded and made again, where everything was negotiation, Dante Vercelli had learned to treat most declarations as opening moves. He'd heard "I won't compete anymore" and processed it, the way he processed most things Elena said when she was upset, as a statement requiring management, not immediate action. He went to bed. He figured he'd handle it in the morning. He figured wrong. Marcus Tello had been with the Vercelli operation for 16 years, which made him one of the longer-standing members of Dante's inner circle, and also, if you were being honest about it, one of the few people Dante actually trusted rather than simply controlled. He was a compact man with careful eyes and a habit of arriving places 2 minutes early, which Dante read as reliability, and Elena had always read as anxiety in disguise, the move of a man who'd learned that being late had consequences. He called Dante at 7:42 the next morning. Dante was still in bed. He'd slept badly, woken once at 4 thinking he'd heard the front door, told himself he was imagining things. He answered on the second ring, because Marcus didn't call before 8 unless something was wrong. "We have a problem," Marcus said. "Define problem." "The Foundation's bank accounts. The joint operating account for the legitimate businesses. And the Harrington Trust." A pause. "They've all been not frozen, not flagged. She's moved them. Legally. Everything's been restructured. Our attorneys got notice at 7 this morning." Dante sat up. "What do you mean restructured?" "I mean Elena filed paperwork 3 days ago. Apparently she's had that's in process for weeks, maybe longer, transferring control of the foundation to an independent board. The Harrington Trust is now under a separate legal entity she controls. The operating accounts for the restaurant group, the property management firm, the consulting contracts, all of it has been moved to accounts that require her co-signature or are entirely under her authority." Marcus paused again. "Dante. She didn't take anything that wasn't legally hers. That's the thing. Everything she moved, she had the right to move." Dante didn't say anything. "There's more," Marcus said. "Tell me." Gino Ferretti called. "And Sal Benedetto. They want to sit down. They've heard, I don't know how they heard, but they've heard there's some kind of dispute." "There's no dispute," Dante said. His voice was very flat. "Right. I told them that. But Gino said, and I'm quoting, 'We just want to make sure the house is in order.'" Marcus cleared his throat. "Dante, if the other families sense any kind of instability, set up the sit-down Thursday." And Marcus, he stopped. He needed a second to locate the next sentence. "Find out where she is." There was a brief pause. "She's at the apartment on Superior, the one she kept in her name." Another pause, as if Marcus was weighing whether to say the next part. She always paid that rent herself. It's been in her name for about 6 years. 6 years. Dante stood at the window of his bedroom and looked out at the garden Elena had designed and paid for and maintained not with her own hands, but with her attention, showing up to direct the landscaping firm twice a year, selecting everything herself, knowing the names of things he'd never learned to look at. 6 years she'd kept that apartment. 6 years she'd been paying for a place she could go. He'd had no idea. That was the first time it occurred to him not as a full thought, more like the leading edge of one, that there might be things about his wife he had never bothered to know. Celeste Rourke found out Elena was gone the same morning, through a text from a friend who moved in overlapping social circles. She read it twice, then set her phone face down on her kitchen counter and allowed herself, privately, a moment of something she'd later be ashamed of, relief. Passed quickly. She wasn't that person, or she didn't want to be, but it had been there. She and Dante had been involved for 7 months. It had started at a charity event, one of Elena's charity events, which was an irony. Celeste didn't examine too closely and progressed in the particular way. These things progress when one party has money and power, and the other has decided that proximity to money and power is a reasonable substitute for the life she'd imagined. Celeste was not stupid. She was, in fact, quite smart, which was part of the problem. Because smart people who make bad choices do so with full awareness and have to live with the knowledge that they knew better. She'd told herself the usual things. That Dante's marriage was already over before she arrived. That Elena was cold, distant, more interested in her foundations and her paperwork than in her husband. That what she and Dante had was real in a way his marriage hadn't been in years. She believed maybe half of that. She called Dante at 8:30. He picked up on the 4th ring, which was unusual. Dante always picked up fast. "I heard about Elena," she said. "Are you all right?" A silence that lasted a beat too long. "I'm handling it. If you need, I'll call you later, Celeste." He hung up. She stood in her kitchen with her phone in her hand and felt, for the first time, the specific chill of understanding that she had not accounted for all the variables. Elena's apartment on Superior Street was a 1-bedroom on the 14th floor, with north-facing windows and very little furniture which she'd always kept deliberately spare. She'd furnished it slowly over 6 years, replacing the original staging pieces one by one, with things she actually chose: a sofa in a particular shade of gray, a desk lamp she'd seen in a shop in Wicker Park and thought about for 2 weeks before going back for it. It wasn't a showpiece. It was just a room that was entirely hers, without anyone else's history in it. She made coffee. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop and sent 4 emails, to the foundation's new board chair, to her attorney, to the head of HR at the restaurant group, a woman named Patricia, who'd been with the company for 9 years, and who Elena had promoted twice, and who deserved to know that the transition wouldn't affect her position, and to her closest friend, a woman named June who lived in Portland, and who would receive the email, read it, and call within 20 minutes. June called in 18. "Tell me everything," June said, skipping hello. Elena told her. Not everything. She wasn't someone who told everything at once. She'd always processed in layers, but enough. The phone, the name, the ring on the table. Dante's face when she'd said she wouldn't compete anymore. "How are you actually doing?" June asked, when Elena finished. "I slept 4 hours, and I feel—" She stopped. She was looking at the north-facing windows, at the gray November sky over the lake. "I feel like I put something down that was very heavy, and I'm waiting to find out what it feels like to walk without it." "That's not nothing." "No," Elena said. "It's not nothing." She hung up and sat for a while longer. Then she opened a file she'd been building slowly for 3 years, methodical, careful, the way she did everything, and began reviewing what remained to be done. She had not destroyed anything. That was important to her. She'd moved what was legally hers to move, protected what could be protected, and structured things in a way that would allow Dante's legitimate employees to continue drawing salaries while the corporate restructuring worked itself out. She'd thought about them: Patricia in HR, and the kitchen staff at the restaurant group, and the grounds crew, and the young accountant named Devin, who was putting himself through his CPA certification, and who had asked Elena once, very seriously, whether she thought honesty mattered in business, and she'd said yes, and meant it. She hadn't burned anything down. She'd just stopped holding it up. By Wednesday, Dante had met with his attorneys, his accountant, and 2 members of his inner circle, and what he'd been told, in various ways, and with various degrees of diplomatic cushioning, was this: Elena had not broken a single law. Every account she'd transferred, every trust she'd restructured, every board appointment she'd made. All of it had been done with proper documentation, proper filings, appropriate legal counsel, and timing that suggested she had been building toward this for years. She had not stolen from him. She had removed herself. The distinction, his attorney explained carefully, was significant. The foundation was always half in her name, the attorney said. The Harrington Trust was structured as a joint entity, but the control provisions favored whoever filed for independent management first, and she filed first. The operating accounts. He looked at his notes. She had co-signing authority on all of them. She exercised it. Can we contest any of it? Dante asked. We can try. But she's been thorough. The attorney paused. Dante, whoever helped her structure this knew what they were doing. This didn't happen overnight. No, it hadn't. He thought about what Marcus had said. 6 years she'd kept that apartment. He thought about all the times he'd been in his office with the door closed, and Elena had been somewhere in the house, doing whatever. Elena did. He'd never been terribly specific about it in his mind, he realized. He'd just known she was there. The way you know a piece of furniture is there, which was a thought that made him feel something he didn't have a clean word for. And he understood that while he'd been managing his operations, making his decisions, navigating his world, she had been building something, quietly, without anyone watching. He'd thought he was the strategic one. He told Marcus to call her. She picked up on the second ring. Elena, Dante, her voice was the same, completely the same. That was somehow worse than if it had been cold or shaking. It was just her voice, measured and clear, as if she'd been expecting this call and had decided exactly how she would take it. We need to talk, he said. All right, in person. Pause. My attorney will be present, that's not. It's not negotiable, she said, not harshly, just firmly. He agreed. Because for the first time in longer than he could pinpoint, he was in a situation he hadn't anticipated, with someone who had clearly anticipated it completely. The meeting was at his attorney's office on Michigan Avenue, a Friday afternoon in November, with rain against the tall windows and the particular quality of gray light that made everything look institutional. Elena arrived with her attorney, a woman named Catherine Maris, small and precise, with reading glasses on a chain and a reputation in Chicago legal circles for being, as Dante's own attorney had warned him in advance, absolutely methodical and essentially unflappable. Elena wore a dark coat over dark trousers, her hair pulled back. She looked, and Dante was unprepared for this, though he couldn't have said what he'd expected. She looked rested. That was the word. She looked like someone who'd slept. He hadn't slept properly in 3 days. She sat across from him at the conference table and met his eyes without any visible difficulty, and Dante felt something shift slightly in his chest. Some pressure he recognized, but hadn't felt in a very long time, the feeling of being at a table with someone who held more than you did. He wasn't used to that feeling at this kind of table. Thank you for coming, he said, because he'd been told to start there. Of course, Elena said. His attorney began with the legal overview, what had been transferred, what the filing timeline was, what options existed for restructuring the arrangement going forward. Spoke for about 8 minutes. Catherine Maris took notes without expression. Elena listened without expression. When his attorney finished, Maris responded, and what she said was, in summary, that every action Elena had taken was legally sound, that she had no obligation to reverse any of it, and that she was prepared to discuss a formal separation agreement, but had no intention of returning joint assets to sole Vercelli control. When both attorneys had said their pieces, there was a pause. Dante looked at Elena. Can we have a few minutes? He said. Maris glanced at Elena. Elena nodded slightly. The attorney stepped out. Dante and Elena sat across from each other, with the rain on the windows and the long conference table between them, and Dante felt, more acutely than at any point in the last 3 days, that he had drastically misread the nature of the situation he was in. I want you to come home, he said. Elena looked at him for a moment. Looked, the way she had in the doorway of his study, that quality of stillness that he'd always mistaken for patience. I know you do, she said. I can fix this. No, she said, not unkindly. You can't. Elena, Dante. She leaned forward slightly, and her voice was the same as it had always been, the same register, and that was the thing he couldn't handle. He realized he'd been expecting anger. He could work with anger. He knew how to navigate someone's anger. What he couldn't navigate was this, whatever this was. I'm not doing this because of Celeste. I want you to understand that. Celeste she's a symptom. What she told me when I found out is that I had been right to start building an exit 3 years ago. She confirmed something I already knew. He stared at her. You knew 3 years ago. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know the shape of it yet. She paused. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. You want to talk about what matters. She set her hands flat on the table. What matters is that for 14 years, I helped build something. Kept the legitimate side clean. I managed the foundation. I managed the people. I managed the relationships that made you look like more than what you were in rooms, were looking like more than what you were kept you safe. And I did all of that. She stopped. One breath. I did all of that while being invisible to you, while you forgot to look at me, while you left for Miami, and I sat with it and told myself I was holding the family together. She held his gaze. I am done holding things together that were never actually mine to hold. Dante's jaw was tight. I made mistakes, he said. His voice came out lower than he'd intended, which wasn't strategy, it was just true. Yes, she said, you did. The word felt foreign in his mouth, not because he'd never said it, but because he understood, in this specific moment, that it wasn't enough. I'm sorry, Elena. She looked at him for a long moment. I know you are, she said. That's actually harder than if you weren't. Celeste called that evening. He didn't pick up. He called her back 20 minutes later, sitting in his car outside the office building, because he hadn't been able to make himself drive home yet. How did it go? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Dante, I need some time, Celeste. A pause. The particular quality of that pause. What does that mean? It means I need to think. He leaned his head back against the headrest. Outside, rain on the car windows. Chicago November gray and heavy and close. This isn't what I expected. You didn't think she'd actually fight back. It wasn't a question, he noticed that. Celeste was smart enough to already know the answer. I didn't think she'd be this, he stopped. Prepared, Celeste offered. He didn't say anything, Dante. Her voice had changed slightly, something careful entering it. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Ask. Are you still in love with her? He sat in the rain-dark car on Michigan Avenue, with the question hanging in the closed space around him. And what he felt was not a clear answer, which was itself a kind of answer, which was the thing he wasn't ready to look at directly. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. He hung up. He sat in the parking structure for a long time, long enough for the rain to ease and the garage to mostly empty out around him. And he thought about a specific night he hadn't thought about. In years, a Tuesday night, early in their marriage, when Elena had been up late at the kitchen table, with documents spread around her, and he'd come down for water, and she'd been so absorbed she hadn't heard him come in. He'd stood in the doorway for a full minute watching her work, the way she held her pen and made small margin notes, the particular concentration in her face, and he'd thought he remembered this clearly, which was strange given how little attention he'd paid it. At the time he'd thought, she is the most capable person I have ever met. And then he'd gotten his water and gone back to bed. He'd thought it, filed it away, and never once thought to do anything with it. He drove home to an empty house. Rosa had left the freesia in the entry table vase old habit, or maybe kindness. He stopped and looked at it for a moment. He didn't know what kind of flower it was. He'd never asked. He stood in the entry hall of his 3-story limestone house, with its expensive furniture and its real art, and the ghost of a woman's careful attention in every corner of it, and he understood something that had been trying to locate him for 3 days. He hadn't lost Elena when she walked out. He'd been losing her for years, one unlooked-at thing at a time. Gino Ferretti was 64 years old, built like a man who'd been built for a different era, with the particular manner of someone who'd lived so long inside a specific kind of power that he'd forgotten how to be other than what he was. He ran interests on the south side, and in 2 suburbs to the west had a handshake arrangement with the Vercelli family going back to Dante's father, and operated under the general principle that stability was preferable to chaos, except when chaos could be advantageous, in which case chaos was fine. Thursday sit-down was at a restaurant Dante had used for years' private room. Solid staff, no recording concerns. Gino brought 1 man as protocol required. Dante brought Marcus. Gino ordered wine. He talked for a few minutes about things that weren't the subject. Then he set down his glass and looked at Dante, the way older men in his position look at younger men who've shown weakness. Your wife, he said. She moved some things around. It's being handled, Dante said. Right, Gino turned his glass. What I've heard is she moved some things in a way that made it look like you didn't know it was coming. What you've heard, Dante said, is incomplete. Gino nodded slowly. Kind of nod that isn't agreement. Dante, I say this with respect for your father's memory and for what you've built. The Vercelli name means something in this city because people believe your house is in order. If your house is not in order, He paused, spreading his hands. Creates complications. My house, Dante said, carefully, is in order. Gino looked at him for a moment, then smiled with the lower half of his face. Good, he said. Then there's nothing to worry about. But both of them knew what the conversation actually was. It was Gino, and through Gino, others testing the edges of a structure they'd always assumed was solid, seeing if there was give, seeing if the Vercelli name still meant what it had meant. In the car on the way back, Marcus said, Sal Benedetto's people have been asking around, asking about the property management contracts. I know, Dante said. Dante. Marcus hesitated. He never hesitated, which meant whatever came next mattered. Elena's not just protecting herself. Some of what she's doing, the way she's restructured the foundation, the way she's positioned the legitimate assets, it's also protecting the employees, the ones who work clean. She's making sure they don't get caught in whatever happens next. Dante looked out the window. Yeah, he said, I know that too. She's been thinking about this for a long time, Marcus said. Longer than I knew, Dante said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then she's good at it. She always was, Dante said. And then he went quiet for the rest of the drive, because there was nothing to add, and because saying it out loud, acknowledging, plainly, that the woman he'd underestimated for years had been operating at a level he hadn't noticed, felt like something he needed to sit with rather than talk around. The first Saturday after she left, Elena called Patricia in HR, not to manage anything, just to check in. Mrs. Vercelli, Patricia said, and then stopped. I'm sorry, should I still? Elena is fine, Elena said. They talked for 20 minutes. Patricia was worried about her team. Elena told her what she could, which was that the restaurant group was stable, that the restructuring of the parent and accounts wouldn't affect payroll, that she was monitoring the situation. What she didn't say, but which Patricia heard anyway, was that Elena was paying attention, that someone with authority over the outcome was paying attention to the right things. After she hung up, Elena sat at her desk in the Superior Street apartment and thought about what Marcus had said to Dante. In the car, she didn't know he'd said it, but she would have guessed it because she knew Marcus. She'd known him for years. She knew that whatever else Marcus was, he was honest with the people he reported to. She thought about what it must be like for Dante, right now, to be discovering how much she'd been doing. She didn't feel satisfaction about it. That surprised her. She'd expected to feel something vindictive, something sharp and satisfying. What she felt instead was something quieter and sadder. The recognition that a man who had been genuinely good to her in some ways, in some years, in some rooms, had simply never learned to look at what was right in front of him. She opened a new document and started drafting the foundation's transition plan. She had work to do. The work had always been there. She just wasn't doing it for someone who didn't look up anymore. The freesia died on Tuesday. Rosa came in to change the entry table flowers and stood for a moment looking at the vase, at the dried-out stem Elena had always been the one to notice, and she took it away without replacing it. Dante saw it from the second-floor landing on his way down to breakfast, the empty vase, the bare table, and said nothing. Dante took it. He went to the kitchen, poured his own coffee, and stood at the counter, drinking it cold because he'd forgotten to check the temperature before he drank. He'd been forgetting things. Small things, mostly. The kind of things you don't notice are being managed until they stop being managed. The dry cleaning that didn't come back on time because nobody had confirmed the pickup. The meeting his assistant had double-booked because Elena used to quietly cross-check his calendar against his attorney's and catch overlaps before they became problems. The household account that showed a question mark flag from his bank because Elena had always been the one to reconcile it, and without her reconciliation, the bank's software had generated an automated alert that sat in an inbox for 9 days before anyone noticed. None of it was catastrophic. That wasn't the point. The point was the accumulation. The way the house felt different, not empty exactly, but like something had gone out of the air pressure, like a room with a window cracked that nobody could locate. He'd called her once more on Sunday. She'd picked up. They'd spoken for 6 minutes, almost entirely about logistics, almost entirely practical. And when she'd said goodbye, her voice had been the same as it always was. And that was the worst part. The fact that she didn't sound wrecked, didn't sound like someone fighting anything. She sounded like someone who had put something down and walked away. And the walking away wasn't difficult anymore. He poured the cold coffee down the drain and made a fresh cup and took it into his study, where Marcus was already waiting. Marcus had learned in 16 years to read Dante's silences the way a sailor reads weather, not by what was present, but by the particular quality of what was absent. The Dante who sat down across from him that Monday morning was a man who hadn't fully slept in a week, whose jaw was carrying tension in the hinge the way it did when he was managing something he didn't have a clean answer for yet. Marcus had seen Dante navigate rival factions, federal investigations, 2 attempted takeovers from within his own organization. He had never seen him look like this. Sal Benedetto made contact, Marcus said. He set a folder on the desk between them. His attorney reached out to the property management company directly. Wants to discuss the Meridian Street contracts. Dante looked at the folder without opening it. Through channels? Outside channels. That's the thing. Marcus tapped the folder. He went to the property management office, not to our attorneys, not through the usual intermediary. Directly to the office manager, a woman named Sandra Reeves, who's been with the company 8 years, and who apparently called Elena about it before she called us. Dante's eyes moved up from the folder. She called Elena. Elena told her to document everything, refer all further contact to Catherine Maris's office, and not sign anything. Marcus paused. Sandra Reeves did exactly that. She said, and I'm quoting Mrs. Vercelli told me 2 years ago that if anyone came to me with contract questions outside of normal channels, I should treat it as a red flag and call her. The silence that followed was a specific kind, not the silence of nothing to say. The silence of too much to absorb at once. 2 years ago, Dante said. 2 years ago, Marcus said. Dante leaned back in his chair. Outside a gray Chicago morning, sleet beginning to pick at the windows. He looked at the folder. He thought about Elena sitting across from Sandra Reeves. 2 years ago, he had no memory of that conversation, no awareness it had ever occurred, and saying calmly, if anyone comes to you outside of normal channels, call me. 2 years ago. When he'd thought things were when he'd thought they were fine. When he'd been in this same study with the door closed, thinking about other things. What does Benedetto actually want, he said. The Meridian Street contracts are worth about $2.1 million annually. If the property management company gets folded into Benedetto's holding structure, Marcus opened the folder himself, turned it to face Dante. He gets the income stream, and he gets access to the building management on 4 properties that are not unimportant from a practical standpoint for things that aren't property management. He wants the access. He wants the access. The money's secondary. Marcus paused. And Dante, he thinks right now might be a good time to ask, because Elena's moved the legitimate assets around, and there's uncertainty about who has the authority to say no. Elena has the authority to say no. I know that, Marcus said. Does Benedetto? Dante called Benedetto directly. That was a choice going around the usual buffer, speaking plainly, not giving Sal the courtesy of another layer to hide behind. They had never been close, Sal and Dante, but they'd maintained the arrangement because it was mutually convenient, the way a lot of arrangements in their world were maintained. Dante had always had a read on Sal as fundamentally cautious, someone who tested edges but pulled back from anything that looked likely to cost him more than it gained. What he heard on the phone, underneath Sal's careful language and diplomatic phrasing, was something he hadn't expected. Confidence. Not caution dressed up as boldness, actual confidence. The specific tone of a man who believes the math has shifted in his favor. I'm just exploring options, Sal said. The company's going through some restructuring. There's some uncertainty about direction. It's a reasonable time to have a conversation. The company is fine, Dante said. Right, I've heard that. A pause. I've also heard Elena's got those assets under her independent management now, which, again, I'm just going by what's out there, makes the picture a little complicated for anyone trying to figure out who's actually at the table. Elena and I are in agreement about the company's direction, Dante said. He said it with complete steadiness, the way he'd said 100 things that were only partially true. Sal was quiet for a moment. Then good, that's good to hear. Then I'm sure there's no issue. Another pause, the kind that carries its own content. Give my regards to Elena. He hung up. Dante sat with the phone in his hand and thought about what Sal had just done, which was demonstrate, carefully and deniably, that he knew Elena and Dante were not in agreement, that he knew the situation better than Dante had wanted him to, which meant someone had told him, or enough of the right people had guessed, and the guesses had reached him, which was functionally the same thing. He called Marcus back. We have a leak, he said. The leak, when they found it, was a man named Perry Lund. Perry had been on the administrative side of the legitimate businesses for 4 years, not someone who knew operational details, not someone with access to anything truly sensitive, but someone positioned to see the shape of things. Counts. The restructuring filings. The timing of Elena's moves. Perry had a cousin who worked for a Southside firm that did occasional contract work for Benedetto's organization, and Perry had, over the course of several weeks, allowed himself to be useful in small ways that had built into something he probably hadn't fully planned. Marcus brought him in on a Wednesday, not to the house, to an office in a building downtown that Dante used for things that needed to happen, without a paper trail to his primary address. Perry was 29 years old, soft-featured, with the look of a man who had done something he knew was catastrophically stupid and could not locate a way to walk it back. Dante sat across from him. Marcus stood near the door. "Tell me," Dante said, "exactly what you told them and when." Perry told him. It took about 12 minutes. The account structures, the foundation board changes, the timeline of Elena's filings. Not everything. Perry didn't know everything. It had been by design, Elena's design. She'd always kept the full picture, fragmented across people who only saw their portion. But enough. Enough to show Benedetto that the restructuring was real, that Dante hadn't anticipated it, and that there was a window. When Perry finished, Dante looked at him for a long moment. "Who else knows you did this?" he said. Perry swallowed. "Nobody, I swear. It was just stopped." He started again. "Just my cousin, Rafi. He said it wasn't. He made it sound like it wasn't a big deal. Just general information." "General information," Dante repeated. Perry didn't say anything. Marcus looked at Dante. The look asked a question. Dante answered it with the slight movement of his head. "Not that, not here." Perry would be handled, but not the way Perry was probably imagining and sweating through right now. He'd be severed, permanently removed from access, put somewhere he couldn't do further damage. Details would be worked out. What Dante was thinking about, though, walking out of that room and back into the gray Chicago afternoon, was not Perry Lund. Perry Lund was a symptom. What he was thinking about was the fact that Elena had structured things specifically so that Perry's information, whatever he'd passed along, was incomplete. She'd distributed knowledge the way you distribute cargo on a ship, to keep it balanced, and to make sure no single point of failure can sink the whole thing. She'd planned for Perry. She'd planned for someone like Perry without even knowing who it would be. He drove to the Superior Street building. He didn't go up. He sat in the car outside for a few minutes, watching the building's entrance, the revolving door, people coming and going in the November cold. Then he put the car in drive and left. He wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Celeste had started to understand her position. It was not a comfortable understanding, and it had arrived gradually, the way unwelcome knowledge tends to, not in one blow but in accumulations. The unreturned calls, the shortened conversations. The way Dante said, "I'll call you later," and then called later with nothing in his voice, just the mechanics of a conversation being discharged. She wasn't stupid. She had never been stupid. What she had been, she was starting to understand, was convenient, and there is a specific humiliation in realizing that the gap between what you imagined you were to someone and what the situation, examined clearly, actually shows you. She called a friend a woman named Diane, who was sharp and unsentimental, and who would not perform comfort she didn't mean. "He's not going to leave her," Diane said. They were having coffee at a place on Oak Street, the good kind. The kind where the table between you is small enough that there's nowhere to hide. He was never going to leave her. That was never actually on the table. That's not... Celeste stopped. She pressed her thumbnail against the edge of her coffee cup. That's not what he said. What did he say? Exactly. She thought about it. She thought about the specific words. Not, "I'll leave her." He'd never said that, she realized, going back through it. What he'd said was things like, "Things have been difficult between us for a long time, and you make me feel something I haven't felt in years, and I don't know what my marriage is anymore." All of which, she understood now, from this particular seat, with Diane looking at her without pity, were true statements that had carried enormous weight without making a single actual promise. He never said it directly, she admitted. Diane wrapped both hands around her cup. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." She looked out the window. Michigan Avenue, gray and busy, people with their heads down against the wind. "I don't know what I want anymore." "Yes, you do," Diane said. "You want to not be the other woman." Celeste didn't answer because the answer was obvious, and saying it out loud would have required her to acknowledge that she'd let herself become exactly that, which was a level of accounting she wasn't quite ready for yet. She drove home. She stood in her apartment, nice, genuinely nice, good light, good neighborhood, the kind of apartment you build when you have taste and ambition and haven't let yourself look too hard at the means, and she thought about Elena, not with guilt exactly, with something more uncomfortable than guilt, which was recognition. She told herself Elena was cold, distant, more interested in her work than her husband. That was the story you tell yourself. What she was beginning to understand was that Elena had been doing something, all that time, all those years, while Celeste had been looking at Elena as a figure, at the edge of the situation, the wife, the obstacle, the person who would eventually become irrelevant. Elena had been building something, moving things, preparing. And it turned out Elena hadn't needed Dante to stay or leave. She'd needed time, and she'd taken it. Celeste sat on her couch in her nice apartment and felt, with unexpected clarity, the difference between a woman who had been waiting to be chosen and a woman who had spent years choosing herself. She wasn't sure which one she was. She was beginning to suspect it wasn't the second one. Dante met with Gino Ferretti again, this time without the theater of a sit-down. Gino called on a Thursday evening and said simply, "Come by." And Dante went, because with men like Gino, the way you respond to a casual summons is itself a message. Gino's house in River Forest was a different era of money older, heavier, with dark wood everywhere, and the particular smell of a house that has been lived in by the same family for generations. They sat in Gino's study, which was full of books. Dante had always suspected Gino had never opened, and Gino poured from a bottle he kept for people he was still treating as equals. "Benedetto," Gino said without ceremony. "I'm aware of Benedetto," Dante said. Gino swirled his glass. He was looking at the middle distance, the way he did when he was saying something he'd already worked out, but wanted to present as spontaneous. "There are 2 or 3 people who are, let's say, reconsidering the landscape, seeing if maybe some things are available that were not available before. Nothing is available. That's good to hear." Gino set his glass down. "Dante, I'm going to ask you something directly, because I knew your father, and I think you deserve directness." He looked at him. "Is Elena coming back?" The question landed in the room and sat there. "We're working through it," Dante said. Gino nodded. The nod that wasn't agreement, because the reason people are reconsidering the landscape, and I want to be honest with you, it's not just the money. The money's the money. That sorts itself out. What they're reacting to is the idea that the Vercelli house doesn't have a woman in it who people trust. He paused. Your criminal partners trust you because they fear you. The legitimate world trusted the Vercelli name because of Elena. She is the reason judges and city council members and hospital board chairs were willing to be in a room with your name on the door. He looked at his glass. Without that, you're just another man in the dark. Dante held very still. "I'll handle Benedetto," he said. "I don't doubt that," Gino said. "But Dante," he stood, signaling the end of it. "Handle Elena first." He went to the Superior Street building on a Friday evening. He called from downstairs. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "I'm outside," he said, a pause. "I know." Which meant she'd probably seen him from the window, or seen the car. She'd always been more observant than he gave her credit for, which was itself the whole problem, the whole condensed version of everything. "Can I come up?" Another pause longer. "All right." The elevator took too long. He stood in it, looking at his own reflection in the brushed steel door, which gave him back a distorted version of himself, slightly compressed, slightly off, and he thought that was about right. Buzzed him in. She was in dark trousers and a gray shirt, hair down. She'd been working, papers on the desk, laptop open. She didn't close the laptop right away. She closed it after he'd been standing in the doorway long enough to register that she was going to finish her thought before she stopped for him, which was not a deliberate provocation, but simply what it looked like to be Elena in her own space on her own time. She gestured to the couch. He sat. She took the chair, her desk chair, turned away from the desk to face him, which kept a different distance than the couch would have, and he noticed that, the architecture of it. "Sends his regards," Dante said. "Does he?" Her voice was dry. She knew exactly what that meant. "Sal Benedetto is making moves on the property management contracts." "Catherine knows," she said. "We've already filed a response through the company's legal counsel. Benedetto's attorney was informed this morning that all contract discussions need to go through the proper channels and that there are no assets currently in negotiation." Stared at her. "You handled it already." "I handle things," she said. Not sharply, just as a fact. He was quiet for a moment. He looked around the apartment. He'd never been in it. He hadn't known it existed until Marcus told him, and now that he was here, it was strange to see a room that was entirely Elena, without any of the architecture of their shared life in it. It felt very her spare, but not cold, with the particular quality of a space where someone had made deliberate choices about what mattered. "Elena," he said. He'd been working on how to say the next part, and none of what he'd worked out felt right now that he was actually here, so he just said it. I need you to understand what's happening. Benedetto is not the only one. There are people who think the situation is exploitable, she said. Yes, because they think your house isn't in order. She looked at him steadily. Because I left. Because you left. And you want me to come back to stabilize things. She said it without heat, without inflection. To be the face that makes the legitimate world comfortable. So the judges and the board chairs and the hospital fundraisers still feel okay associating with the Vercelli name. He opened his mouth. She raised one hand slightly, not a stop gesture, just a small, precise movement. I'm not asking you to admit that's the calculation. I'm telling you I understand that's the calculation. What I'm also telling you is that the answer is no. She held his gaze. I'm not a stabilizing asset, Dante. I was a person who helped build something, because I believed in what the legitimate side could be. I am not going to come back to be window dressing for a criminal organization in a moment of inconvenience. The sentence landed in the room. That's not what I'm asking, he said. Then what are you asking? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking at his hands for a moment before he looked back at her. I'm asking you to give me time. Not to come home. Not tonight. Just time. To figure out how to what, Dante? Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it now. Something that had not been there in the attorney's conference room. Something that had more edges. How to fix it. How to manage it. How to restructure things until the situation looks better from the outside. How to deserve you. He said it before he'd fully decided to say it. It came out rough and without architecture, which was unlike him. And he saw something shift in her face, not softening, exactly. More like recognition. Like she'd just heard something she'd waited a long time to hear and wasn't sure what to do with it now that it had arrived. She looked at him for a long time. Dante, she said finally, you said that like it's a project you can complete. Like there's a timeline and a deliverable, and once you reach it, She stopped. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose, a gesture of exhaustion he'd seen before, usually late at night, over something complicated. I need you to hear me, not manage me, not strategize around what I'm saying. Just hear it. She lowered her hand. I spent 14 years being invisible to you. Not neglected, you weren't cruel. You provided things. You showed up for certain things. You were, in certain rooms, a good husband. But you never actually looked. You never learned what I was doing or why or what it cost. You didn't know what flowers Rosa left on that table. You didn't know about this apartment. You didn't know I'd built an exit because I'd been watching what you were building, and I knew eventually I'd need one. She paused. You didn't know me, Dante. You knew the version of me that was useful to your life. That's not the same. He didn't have an answer. That was new. He'd spent 30 years building a life on the premise that there was always an answer, a move, a counter, a way to restructure the situation into one he could manage. Sitting in this spare apartment with Elena looking at him with that quiet, exhausted honesty, he didn't have one. I know, he said. She blinked, like she'd expected a defense and received something else. I know I didn't, he said. He stopped. Tried again. Since you left, I've been finding things. In the house. In the business. Things I didn't know were there, because you were handling them, and I never asked what you were handling. He looked at his hands again. Rosa leaves Frisia for you. Every week. 8 years. He paused. I didn't know what kind of flower it was until I looked it up. Elena was very still. I looked it up, he said. That's where I am. I'm a man who looked up what flower his wife likes, because it took her leaving for me to notice there was a flower. The room was quiet. Sleet against the windows, another gray night. Chicago in November, the city going about its business outside. Elena stood. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him, looking out. He watched the line of her shoulders, the set of them, and he knew her well enough better than he'd known an hour ago, somehow, or maybe just more honestly, to know she wasn't closing down. She was thinking. I got a call this morning, she said, still facing the window, from a man named Roy Hallis. Do you know that name? Dante stilled. Where did you hear that name? She turned around. Her expression had changed. Whatever the moment had been between them, whatever had been building toward something human and difficult and true, it had shifted. Her eyes were steady and careful in a new way. Roy Hallis called my attorney's office, she said. He said he represents a group of investors with an interest in the Vercelli Foundation's endowment. He said they'd be interested in a meeting to discuss. She watched Dante's face as she said the next words. Repatriation of certain funds. Dante was on his feet. Elena. His voice had dropped into a register She recognized not anger, something colder. Listen to me. You do not meet with Roy Hallis. You do not return that call. You have Catherine Maris send a non-response, and you do not put yourself in a room with anyone connected to that name. She held her ground. Who is he? He is not someone you handle through attorneys and filings. He was across the room, closer to her than he'd been all evening, and his voice was controlled, but only barely. Elena, this is not Benedetto. This is not a contract dispute. Roy Hallis works for people who are not interested in legal channels. If he contacted your attorney's office, it's because someone told him you have control of assets they want access to, and they will not. Stopped. He looked at her face. He looked at the specific expression she was wearing, which was not fear. She wasn't frightened, he realized, which was itself frightening, but something focused and deliberate. You already knew who he was, he said. I looked him up, she said quietly, after the call. Before I called you tonight. He hadn't called her tonight. She'd called, he thought back, and realized, no, she had called him. She'd been the one to reach out, an hour before he'd come over, saying she needed to talk. She'd maneuvered him here. The recognition of it moved through him, the way cold water moves all at once, everywhere. You called me tonight, he said, because you'd already gotten that call, and you wanted to be looking at my face when you told me about it. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. Dante, she said, and her voice had the same measured quality it always had, the same steadiness, but underneath it something he hadn't heard in a long time, not warmth, exactly, but weight. The weight of something that actually mattered to her. Roy Hallis is a problem for both of us now. Not because I'm still your wife in any operational sense. Because my name is on those assets. Because whoever sent him thinks I'm a pressure point. She paused. I need you to tell me everything you know about who is behind this. Not the version you'd tell your attorneys. Everything. He looked at her across the few feet of her spare, deliberate apartment with the sleet at the window and the open laptop on the desk and the faint smell of coffee gone cold, and he understood that they had just crossed something. Not back toward each other, not that, not yet, maybe not ever. But they had crossed into a shared territory that neither of them had chosen, and both of them now had to navigate. Sit down, he said. She sat. He pulled his chair close enough that they were no longer speaking across distance, and for the first time since 2:13 a.m. On the morning she'd put her ring on the table, Dante Vercelli told his wife the truth, not all of it, not yet. But the part that mattered right now, the part that had teeth, the part that had just made her apartment on the 14th floor of a building on Superior Street, no longer the safe spare room she'd built for herself over 6 careful years. He talked for 22 minutes. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was very still. Roy Hallis is not working for Benedetto, she said. No, Dante said. He's working for whoever is above Benedetto in this. Yes. And whoever that is knows I control the legitimate assets and has decided that the fastest way to get to them is through me. She looked at him. Not through you. Through me. Yes, Dante said. Which means you are not safe in this apartment. The sentence sat between them. Elena looked at him with the expression of a woman who had spent 3 years building an exit and had just discovered that the exit itself was a door someone else had been watching. Then we have a problem, she said. And the way she said we, not as a return, not as a reconciliation, but as two peoples who have been suddenly placed on the same side of something dangerous and have no choice but to face it together, told him everything about where things actually stood, which was somewhere he hadn't planned for. Somewhere neither of them had planned for. He talked for 22 minutes, and she listened without moving, and when he finished, the room felt different, smaller, the walls closer, the sleet against the window louder than it had been, before he started talking. Elena stood and walked to the kitchen. She ran the tap for a moment, the way people do when they need 10 seconds to think, without anyone watching their face. She filled a glass, didn't drink it, set it on the counter. Then she came back and stood at the edge of the living room, with her arms crossed not defensively. The way people cross their arms when they're protecting something, but the way you cross them when you're holding yourself together while you reassemble what you just heard. How long has Hargrove been involved, she said. Dante looked up. What? Victor Hargrove. She said the name like she'd been carrying it in her mouth for a while. The man above Benedetto in this. That's who you're not saying. The silence lasted 3 seconds. In Dante's world, 3 seconds of silence was a very long time. How do you know that name? He said. Because Roy Hallis has a limited liability company registered in Delaware that shares a registered agent with 2 other companies, one of which has Victor Hargrove listed as a director. She watched his face. I spent 4 hours yesterday going through incorporation records. It's not hidden well. It's hidden well enough that most people wouldn't look, but I looked. She paused. How long? Dante set his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up. 3 years. Maybe a little more. 3 years. She said it quietly. So, while I was building the exit, you were building a liability I didn't know about. It wasn't. He stopped. He tried again. Hargrove came in on the South Warehouse operations. It was supposed to be a short arrangement. 6 months. Extended. It always extends, she said. Her voice was flat. Not angry, that was the thing he kept running into with her. She wasn't performing anger. She was just stating things that were true and that had weight. Victor Hargrove is not a man you have a 6-month arrangement with. He is a man you belong to once he decides you're useful. She looked at him. Dante. He's not going after the foundation endowment because he wants the money. The foundation has what? 8-9 million in the endowment? About 9. That's nothing to him. That's not why. She uncrossed her arms and sat back down, forward in the chair, the way she sat when she was working through something. He wants the foundation because of what it accesses. The board relationships, the city connections, the hospital contracts, the council members who've been to your fundraisers and shaken our hands. She looked at him steadily. He wants to launder himself through 14 years of Elena Vercelli's reputation. Dante was very still, and you didn't know that, she said. I didn't know he'd move on you directly, he said. I knew he was watching the restructuring. I didn't know he'd identified you as the pressure point, because you didn't think he'd see me as relevant, she said. He didn't answer, because the answer was yes, and yes was the whole problem, and they both knew it. Elena sat back. She pressed one hand flat against her knee, a steadying gesture, something to press against. All right, she said. Then here's what we're going to do tonight. You're going to give me every piece of information you have on Hargrove's involvement with your operations. Not the summary, the details. Dates, names, account structures, whatever Marcus has documented. She held up one hand before he could speak. I'm not going to use it against you. I'm going to use it to understand the full scope of what I'm standing in the middle of, because as of this morning, I am not a bystander anymore, and I need to see the whole board. I'm not finished. Her voice was quiet, but it had a quality that stopped him, the way a hand on a door stops it. And tomorrow morning, before anyone else moves, I'm going to call Catherine, and we're going to make sure every asset under my control is protected in a way that makes it structurally useless to Hargrove. Not just legally, structurally. So that even if someone pressures me, there's nothing I can physically hand over without triggering a chain of legal complications that would take years to unwind. She met his eyes. You should have told me about Hargrove 3 years ago. I know, he said. That's the last time I'm going to say that, she said. We don't have time for it right now. He gave her what she needed. Not all of it, there were things he couldn't give her, things that existed only in handshakes and in the kind of understanding between men that never touches paper, but the documented edge of it, the parts Marcus had been careful enough to record. She took notes in a small, precise hand, asking questions when something was unclear, not reacting to the answers, just absorbing and organizing. He watched her work and felt something he didn't have a name for, not admiration exactly, or not only that, more like grief. The grief of watching something operate at full capacity and understanding that you have been the reason it was constrained. At 11:45, she set her pen down. You should go, she said. Not because I'm asking you to leave. Because if Hargrove has someone watching this building, you being here past midnight makes me look like I'm coordinating with you, which gives him less incentive to approach me separately. She paused. Right now, my value to him is that he thinks I'm operating independently of you. I want to keep that impression for as long as it's useful. Stood. He put on his coat. He stood at the door for a moment. Elena, he said. She looked up from her notes. Be careful, he said. It came out plain without strategy. Just what it was. She looked at him for a moment. You too, she said. He took the elevator down and sat in his car for 4 minutes before he drove. He was thinking about what she'd said launder himself through 14 years of Elena Vercelli's reputation and understanding, for the first time with full clarity, that Elena's position in the world, the thing she'd built, wasn't a side project or a hobby or a pleasant face on a dangerous name. It was a structure. It had load-bearing weight, and he had spent 14 years treating it like decoration. He drove home. The house was dark and quiet and smelled faintly of nothing. Called Marcus. Get me everything we have on Hargrove's movement in the last 30 days, he said. And Marcus, do it yourself. Nobody else on this. The call came at 6:48 the next morning. Not to Elena's cell, not to Catherine Maris's office, to the Foundation's main line, which rang in the small administrative office that Elena had set up in a rented suite in River North, 3 rooms, 2 staff members, the operational center for everything the Foundation did. The person who answered was a young woman named Adrian, who had been with the Foundation for 14 months and who had been hired by Elena personally after a 40-minute interview in which Elena had asked her exactly 2 questions about her. Resume spent the rest of the time asking what she believed about the work. Adrian called Elena at 6:51. A man called, she said. He didn't give his name. He said he wanted to leave a message for you. A pause. Elena could hear Adrian trying to keep her voice steady. He said, "Tell Mrs. Vercelli that the board she appointed is not as independent as she thinks." And then he hung up. Elena was already sitting up in bed, already reaching for her notepad. "Adrian, did you recognize the voice?" No, he was calm. That was the thing. He wasn't threatening, he was just calm. "Okay." Elena kept her voice level. "I need you to go into the office. Don't touch anything on the main administrative computer and wait for me. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Don't call anyone else. Don't answer the main line again this morning." She hung up and called Catherine Maris, who picked up on the second ring with the particular alertness of someone who had been expecting a call. "I know," Catherine said before Elena could start. "Roger Blaine called me 7 minutes ago." Roger Blaine was the chair of the Foundation's newly appointed independent board. He was a 61-year-old former appellate judge with a reputation for integrity that was, as far as Ella had been able to determine over 2 years of careful research, entirely deserved. She had chosen him specifically because he was not connected to Dante's world in any way, because he had no debts to anyone in their orbit, because he was the kind of person whose presence on a board made the board's independence a fact rather than a claim. "What did Roger say?" Elena said. "He said he received a package this morning at his home address. Before 6 a.m. it was on his doorstep when he went out for his paper." Catherine paused. "Elena, it contained documentation, financial records, correspondence. It was designed to look like evidence that his appointment to the board was that his relationship with the Foundation was not as independent as it appears, that he had a prior financial relationship with Dante Vercelli." "He doesn't," Elena said. "I know he doesn't. Roger knows he doesn't." The documentation, Catherine stopped. Whoever put it together knew what they were doing. It's fabricated, but it's fabricated carefully. If it went public, or if it reached the Attorney General's office, it would take months to untangle. Months in which Roger would have to step back from the board. The board's independence would be legally questionable, and the asset restructuring you filed would be subject to challenge. Elena sat on the edge of her bed in the gray early morning and felt the precise sensation of watching something she had built very carefully begin to be dismantled with equal precision. She had planned for Dante. She had planned for Benedetto. She had not planned for someone who had the resources and the patience to fabricate documentation, convincing enough to threaten a former appellate judge. She had not fully planned for Hargrove. "Call Roger back," she said. "Tell him to do nothing. Not a statement, not a resignation, nothing. And Catherine, how quickly can we file for a protective injunction on the board appointments? Can have something drafted by noon. But Elena, if they push this to the Attorney General's, then we push back with everything we have," Elena said. "Start drafting." She dressed in 4 minutes. She was out the door in 6. She met Marcus in the lobby of the Foundation's River North office. Prized her. Marcus, not Dante. Marcus standing near the elevator bank, with his hands in his coat pockets and the specific expression of a man who has come to deliver something he doesn't want to deliver. She stopped 3 feet from him. "Dante sent you," she said. "Dante doesn't know I'm here," he said. She looked at him. In 14 years, she'd developed a reasonable read on Marcus Tello, better than Dante probably knew, because Elena had always paid attention to the people around Dante in ways Dante himself didn't always track. She'd watched Marcus operate. She knew the difference between his controlled face and his actual face. This was his actual face. "Tell me," she said. He glanced at the lobby 2 staff members at the front desk, a courier waiting. He tilted his head toward the far wall. They walked there together. "There's something Dante doesn't know," Marcus said quietly. "Something I've been sitting on for 48 hours, because I was trying to figure out how to handle it, and I've run out of time to handle it on my own." He looked at her. "It's about Hargrove, and it's about why Hargrove moved on you directly, instead of going through Dante." She waited. "Hargrove didn't find out about your asset restructuring from Perry Lund," Marcus said. Perry Lund's information was low level. The structural details, the board appointments, the trust restructuring, the specific legal mechanisms you use that level of detail came from somewhere else. Stopped. Elena felt something shift behind her sternum. How specific, she said. Specific enough that whoever told him had read your actual filings before they were public record, which means they had access to your attorney's documentation. He looked at her. Elena. Someone in Catherine Maris's office has been feeding information to Hargrove's people. The lobby was warm. She felt cold anyway. How long have you known? She said. I got confirmation 48 hours ago. I've been verifying. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper printed, not handwritten. He held it out. This is what I have. It's not everything, but it's enough. She took the paper. She didn't unfold it yet. She looked at Marcus. Why are you bringing this to me and not to Dante? She said. He held her gaze. Because if I bring it to Dante, his first move is to handle it the way he handles things. And if that happens, the person in Catherine's office disappears in a way that makes it impossible for you to use this legally. You lose the evidence and you lose the person's testimony. He paused. You need this in a form you can use, not a form Dante uses. She understood what he was saying. She understood also that Marcus Tello, who had been with Dante for 16 years, was standing in this lobby giving her a piece of information that his loyalty should have sent to Dante first. She didn't know what that meant about Marcus, or what it cost him, but she filed it. She unfolded the paper. The name at the top was one she recognized. Not from Catherine's office, not from the legal team, or much closer than that. The name was Diane Vorel, Celeste's friend, the woman from the coffee shop on Oak Street. The woman Celeste had called when she needed someone unsentimental to talk to about Dante, who had sat across from Celeste and said he was never going to leave her, with the ease of someone who already knew the full situation, because she'd been briefed on it. Elena stood in the lobby of her foundation's office building and read the name 3 times. Then she read the supporting detail time Marcus had provided dates. A phone number that cross-referenced to a number associated with Hargrove's administrative office, 2 transfers to an account that traced back 2 levels to a holding company in Hargrove's network. Diane Vorel was not a paralegal in Catherine's office. That had been wrong. Marcus had gotten the vector wrong, which was understandable because the vector was deliberately obscured. Diane Vorel was Celeste's friend, which meant the information hadn't come from Catherine's office. It had come from Celeste. Elena folded the paper. She thought about that. She gave herself 30 seconds to think about it, which was enough time to understand the full geometry of it. Celeste, who had access to Dante's home, who had heard things in the 7 months of their involvement, who had perhaps seen documents Dante had been careless with, who had a close friend who was being paid by Victor Hargrove to receive and pass along whatever Celeste could provide. Whether Celeste knew Diane was being paid, whether Celeste understood that what she'd been sharing with her trusted friend was going directly to a man who would use it to dismantle Elena's legal protections and access assets worth far more than money. That was a question Elena didn't have an answer to yet. What she had was the paper in her hand and 30 seconds of clarity and the beginning of a plan. Does Dante know about Celeste's connection to this? She said. No, Marcus said. You're sure? I'm sure. She nodded once. She put the paper in her bag. Marcus, what you've done this morning coming here, giving me this, you understand what that means for you. Looked at her steadily. I've been working for Dante for 16 years, he said. I've watched him make a lot of decisions. Some of them were the right call. Some of them. He stopped. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. He should have looked up, he said. Simple as that. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, thank you. He nodded. He left. She went upstairs. She called Dante at 9:17. He picked up immediately, which meant he'd been waiting. I need you to meet me, she said, not the apartment, not your house. The Foundation's River North office. Noon. What happened, he said, noon Dante. She hung up. She spent the 3 hours between that call and noon doing what she always did when the ground shifted working. She met with Adrian, walked her through the security steps for the main line, had the administrative computer's recent access logs pulled by the IT contractor who handled the Foundation systems. She called Catherine and gave her the information about Hargrove's fabricated documentation targeting Roger Blaine, and then she said, carefully, Catherine, I need you to have someone outside your regular team review all recent communications out of your office. Someone you trust completely. Don't explain why yet. Catherine was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. And Catherine, don't discuss this with anyone in your office until you have that review done. Another pause. Elena. Is there something you know that I should know? There's something I'm verifying, Elena said. As soon as I have it confirmed, you'll have everything. She hung up and looked out the window at River North. In the November morning, the street wet and gray. A delivery truck double parked? A woman with a stroller navigating around it with the particular practice frustration. Someone who had done this exact maneuver on this exact block many times before. The ordinary mechanical world going about itself. She didn't feel what she might have expected to feel: rage, or the hot specific hurt of betrayal. What she felt was something quieter and more complicated. Celeste might not have known what Diane was doing with the information. People told their friends things without thinking of the consequences. You talk to someone you trust about a complicated situation. You share details that seem harmless in the moment, and you don't track where those details go. But there was another version of it. There was the version where Celeste had known exactly what Diane was, and had been making a calculated move of her own in a situation she'd decided to treat as a competition. Elena needed to know which version was true before she decided what to do with it. Dante arrived at 11:54. He came alone, which was itself a statement he'd understood from her voice that this was not a meeting for Marcus or attorneys or buffers. He came in his coat, without the particular armor of his usual settings, and he looked like a man who had not slept at all and had stopped pretending that wasn't visible. She had set up in the small conference room. Coffee, because it was cold and they were going to be here a while. The paper Marcus had given her was on the table in front of her, face down. He sat. She turned the paper over and pushed it across to him. He read it. She watched his face. She had learned to read Dante's face in the specific moments when he forgot to manage it, and this was one of those moments, the reading of Marcus's document. The moment the name Diane Vorel connected to Celeste in his mind, and then the particular quality of stillness that came after. It was the stillness of a man absorbing a betrayal from a direction he hadn't protected against, because he hadn't believed it was a direction that needed protecting. He set the paper down. He looked at her. Celeste, he said. Not a question. The connection is Celeste, Elena said. Whether she knew what Diane was doing with the information is something I don't know yet. His jaw was tight. She knew, he said. He stopped. He pressed 2 fingers to his mouth briefly, a gesture she had never seen him make before, and she understood. It was the gesture of a man who was trying not to say what he was actually feeling, because what he was feeling was too unguarded to say in front of anyone. She asked me things, over the months, questions that seemed I thought she was curious. About the business, about how the legitimate side worked. She asked about the foundation once. I told her it was Elena's thing. I didn't think. He stopped again. You told her enough, Elena said. Not accusing, just the fact. Yeah, he said. His voice was very low. Did. The room was quiet for a moment. Here's what I need to know, Elena said. She leaned forward. Hargrove sent Roy Blaine that fabricated documentation this morning. That means he's moving now, not building towards something. Moving. The package was a warning to me and a test of Roger's nerve. If Roger steps back from the board, Hargrove gets what he wants through legal challenge. If Roger stays, Hargrove escalates. She looked at him. How does Hargrove escalate? Dante looked at his hands on the table. He looked like he was deciding something, some final level of the thing he'd been holding back, and she could see the decision move across his face the way weather moves across a flat landscape. He has 2 people on my crew, Dante said. Not people I knew about. People I thought were mine. He looked up. I found out this morning. Called. Marcus confirmed it an hour ago. I didn't know Marcus had already come to you. He paused. Their job, if Hargrove gives the signal, is to make it look like I've lost control of my own organization. Publicly. Violently enough that every legitimate relationship I have, every city connection, every board chair, every council member runs from the Vercelli name. Fast enough that the foundation's independent status becomes irrelevant, because no one wants to be associated with it. Elena sat very still. And without those relationships, she said, the foundation's endowment becomes accessible through the legal challenges to the board, because there's no public will to protect it. Yes, he said. He doesn't want the money, she said, hearing herself say what she'd told Dante the night before, and now understanding more precisely why it was true. He wants the network, the legitimacy. He wants to hollow out what we built and wear it. He wants to be the thing we looked like, Dante said, without building any of it. The thing we built. She noted that. She didn't address it, Dante. She looked at him with the full, clear attention that she usually reserved for documents she was about to sign. If Hargrove's people on your crew move, when does that happen? If he escalates after Roger holds, he thought. 48 hours. Maybe less. Then we have 48 hours to make the move that takes this away from him entirely. She held his gaze. Which means we need to do something you have never done in 30 years of running this organization. He looked at her. He already knew what she was going to say. She could see it in his face, the recognition of it, and underneath that, something that was not quite fear, but was adjacent to it. Particular feeling of standing at the edge of the thing you've spent your whole life protecting yourself from. You need to go to the federal authorities, she said. Not through attorneys, not through back channels. Directly. With everything you know about Hargrove. She paused. And about yourself. The silence that followed was the longest silence of the afternoon. Dante looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at the paper Marcus had given her, face up on the table between them, with Diane Vorel's name at the top, and the thread of it running back to Celeste, and back further to 7 months of careless conversation in rooms Dante had thought were private. He looked at Elena. If I do that, he said, everything ends. The organization, the operations. What's left of the network? He paused. My freedom. Depending on what they want. I know, she said. You understand what you're asking. I understand what I'm asking, she said. I also understand that if you don't, Hargrove destroys the legitimate structure I spent 14 years building, uses it for something that will eventually collapse under its own corruption, and takes down everyone connected to it when it goes. She leaned forward slightly. Trisha in HR, Devin the accountant, Sandra Reeves, Roger Blaine, Adrian downstairs. She let that sit for a moment. People who worked clean, because I made sure there was a clean side to work on. Closed his eyes briefly. You're not doing this for me, he said. You're doing it for them. I'm doing it because it's the only move that protects what's worth protecting, she said. And yes, that includes you. What's worth protecting in you? He opened his eyes. She had not said that to be kind. She had said it because it was true, which was different, and he was starting to understand the difference. I need the night, he said. You have until 8 a.m., she said. After that, I move without you and with what I have. It won't be as clean, and it won't protect you the same way. But it's what I can do. She stood, picked up her papers, Dante. She paused at the door and looked back. People Hargrove has on your crew. Do you know who they are? No, I do, he said. Make sure Marcus knows, she said. And make sure they don't move before morning. She walked out. He sat in the small conference room of the foundation his wife had built, with the cold coffee and the gray November light, and the paper on the table in front of him, and he understood that the life he had constructed over 30 years carefully, ruthlessly, on his own terms was already over. The only question left was what he was willing to burn, to keep the right things standing. And for the first time, what he meant by the right things was not his empire. He sat in that conference room for 11 minutes after Elena left. He knew it was 11 minutes because he watched the second hand on the wall clock make just over 11 full rotations, which was the kind of thing you notice when the rest of your mind is too full to do anything useful. Coffee had gone completely cold. The paper with Diane Vorel's name was still on the table. Outside the window, River North was doing what it always did in the middle of a weekday, moving, indifferent, the city having no opinion whatsoever about what happened inside this room. Picked up his phone and called Marcus. The two on the crew, he said. Kellner and the one called Brace. Yeah, Marcus said. Tonight. Pull them off everything. I want them somewhere they can't communicate, and I want it done quietly enough that neither of them understands it's happening until it's already happened. Pause. And then we wait until morning, Dante said. I'll explain the rest when I see you. He hung up. He sat for another minute. Then he called a number he had memorized 8 years ago and used exactly twice since a federal contact. A man named Aldrich, who worked organized crime out of the Chicago field office and who had, both previous times, been the one to make first contact and to leave the door open in the way that certain federal agents leave doors open when they believe the math on a particular target is eventually going to change. The math had changed. Aldrich picked up on the second ring. Vercelli, he said, just at the name without surprise, as if he'd been expecting this call on some indefinite timeline, and was simply noting that the timeline had resolved. I need a meeting, Dante said. Tonight, not your office. Somewhere that doesn't get recorded before I decide what I'm giving you. Pause. How big is this, Hargrove? Dante said. The pause that followed was longer. Aldrich was not a man who paused. 7 o'clock, he said. I'll send you an address. Dante hung up. He picked up the paper with Diane Vorel's name, folded it, and put it in his coat pocket. He stood, buttoned his coat, and walked out of the conference room. Adrian looked up from the front desk as he passed through the lobby. "Mr. Vercelli," she said, uncertain. He stopped. He looked at her 20-something sharp eyes, the particular posture of someone trying to look more composed than they were. Elena had hired her. Elena had sat across from her and asked 2 questions about her resume and 30 minutes of questions about what she believed, and then given her a job. "You're doing good work here," he said. It came out plain, without the performance of it. Just true. Adrian blinked. "Thank you," she said. He walked out into the cold. Marcus had the situation with Kellner and Brace handled by 4 in the afternoon, with the specific efficiency of someone who had been thinking about how to handle it since morning, and had simply been waiting for the instruction. Dante didn't ask for the details. He trusted Marcus with the details, the same way he'd always trusted him. And then he thought about the fact that Marcus had gone to Elena this morning instead of him, and he held that thought without turning it into something punitive. Marcus had made a judgment call. The judgment call had been correct. That was what you wanted from the people around you, correct judgment, even when it looked disloyal from the outside, especially then. He met Aldrich at a sports bar in Wicker Park that had been chosen clearly for the noise-level televisions everywhere. Tuesday evening crowd, enough ambient sound to make any recording from a distance functionally useless. Aldrich was a lean man in his late 50s, with the particular quality of invisibility that long-term federal agents develop, the ability to sit in a room and look like furniture. He was already there when Dante arrived, with a beer he hadn't touched and a clear sight line to both exits. Dante sat across from him. Aldrich looked at him without saying anything for a moment. Taking inventory, Dante recognized cataloging the fatigue, the set of the jaw, the specific way a man sits when he's already made the decision and is past the part where he might walk it back. "Talk," Aldrich said. Dante talked. He talked for 40 minutes. He talked about the South Warehouse operations, about the structure of the arrangement with Hargrove, about the specific account channels, about the 2 men on his crew who were Hargrove's, about the fabricated documentation targeting Roger Blaine, about the Roy Hallis approach to Elena's attorney, about the timeline 48 hours from Hargrove's escalation trigger, which was now closer to 36. He talked about himself too, his own operations, the things he'd built and the methods he'd used to build them. He said it plainly, without minimizing, without the careful legal architecture of a man trying to preserve options. He said it like a man reading a document into the record and accepting what the record contained. Aldrich listened without expression. He asked 6 questions. 2 of them were clarifying. 4 of them were the kind of questions that told Dante exactly how much Aldrich's office already knew and had been sitting on, waiting for confirmation. They knew a great deal. When Dante finished, Aldrich was quiet for a moment, picked up his beer, took 1 drink, set it down. "Hargrove," he said. "Hargrove," Dante said. "We've been building on him for 4 years," Aldrich said. "What you're giving me the warehouse accounts, the crew placement, that's the connective tissue we've been missing." He looked at Dante. "You understand what this looks like from where I sit?" "I understand," Dante said. "You're not walking away clean." "I know that," Dante said, "but there's a conversation to be had about the shape of it," Aldrich said, "depending on what you can give us and how fast." He paused. "The woman, your wife, she's in this now?" "She's not part of my operations. She never was." "I know that. I'm asking because Hargrove has apparently decided she's a target, which means she's in it whether she chose to be or not." Aldrich looked at him steadily. "Is she protected tonight?" Dante pulled out his phone. He had not thought of this, which was a failure of a kind that landed on him now, with sudden physical weight. Elena was in the Superior Street apartment. She'd spent the day working through attorneys and board chairs and legal filings, and she was alone in a 14th floor apartment that Hargrove's people had apparently been watching long enough to know she was there. He texted Marcus, "Elena, Superior Street, tonight. 2 people outside, nobody gets near the building." Marcus responded in 40 seconds, already there. "Since noon." Put his phone away. He looked at Aldrich. "She's covered," he said. Aldrich nodded. "Then let's talk about tomorrow." Tomorrow arrived at 5:47 a.m. in the form of Marcus calling Dante's cell, with a voice that had a new quality in it, not panic. Marcus didn't do panic, but a tightness that was the closest he got. "Kellner's gone," Marcus said. Dante was on his feet before he was fully awake. "What do you mean gone?" "I mean the place we put him, he's not there. The man I had on him is a pause. He's alive. He'll be okay. But Kellner got out 4 hours ago, And we didn't know until 20 minutes ago when my guy came around. Dante was already dressed, moving toward the door. Brace? Brace is still contained. It's just Kellner. Marcus paused. Dante. If Kellner got word to Hargrove that we pulled them off, then Hargrove knows the timeline's moved, Dante said. He'll push the escalation up. How far up? If he decides we've gone active against him, Marcus stopped. Could be now. It could be happening now. Dante called Aldrich while he was in the elevator. Aldrich picked up on the first ring, which meant Aldrich was already awake, which meant something had already reached his office. We have a problem, Dante said. I know, Aldrich said. There's movement on 3 of Hargrove's legitimate fronts filings, transfers. He's restructuring fast. He's trying to get the assets moved before we can freeze them. A pause. Dante, there's something else. 30 minutes ago, 2 of our surveillance units on Hargrove's River North property lost contact. Lost contact how? Jammed. Someone ran interference on the comm frequency. Aldrich's voice was flat and precise, the voice of a man making decisions in real time. We're repositioning, but there's a gap. 20, maybe 30 minutes, where we don't have eyes. Dante stopped walking. A 30-minute gap. Hargrove, knowing the timeline had moved. The Foundation's River North office, Elena's office, the administrative center of everything she'd structured, the place where the documents lived, where the board chair appointments had been filed, where Adrian came in every morning and turned on the lights. Aldrich, he said. The Foundation office on Huron Street. We don't have somebody there. He was already running. Now. He called Elena while he ran to his car. She picked up on the 3rd ring, which was 2 rings too many, which put his heart somewhere in his throat. I'm at the office, she said before he could speak. Stopped. You're at the office. It's 6 in the morning, Elena. I've been here since 5. I needed to pull the board documentation before the injunction filing at 9. Her voice was awake and focused, the voice of someone who had slept maybe 4 hours and was running on the particular fuel of people who have too much to do to stop. What's wrong? Get out of the building, he said. Right now. Leave the documents. Leave everything. Just get out. Pause. Dante Kellner is loose and Hargrove has a 30-minute window with no federal eyes on his operation. You are in that building alone at 6 in the morning and you are the pressure point. Get out of the building. The silence on the line lasted 4 seconds. Counted them. He was in his car, engine on, already moving. Adrian comes in at 7, Elena said. Her voice had changed, not frightened, but recalibrated, processing. There's a courier scheduled at 6:30 for the injunction packet. Leave the packet. Send Catherine a digital copy and leave. The originals have Elena. His voice came out cracked, which was not something he planned or managed. It just came out that way, raw and unarchitected. Please. Another second of silence. I'm leaving now, she said. He heard her moving the sound of papers, a bag, heels on a hard floor. He heard the sound of a door. He heard the elevator. I'm in the elevator, she said. Stay on the line. I'm on the line. The elevator took 23 seconds. He knew because he counted those, too, driving north on Clark with one hand on the wheel and the phone pressed to his ear, and those 23 seconds were the longest he could remember. In recent history, longer than the meeting with Gino, longer than the 40 minutes with Aldrich, longer than the 11 minutes watching the clock in the conference room. Lobby, she said. Keep moving. Out the front. Turn left. Walk to the coffee place on the corner. Go inside and stay there until I get to you. There are 2 men outside, she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. His hand tightened on the wheel, described them. One by the entrance. One across the street. They're not Marcus's people. Marcus's people I know. A pause, very brief. I'm walking. I'm not running. Good, don't run. Keep walking. The one by the entrance is watching me. Keep walking. Don't look at him again. Coffee place, left turn, go. He heard her breathing. He heard street sounds, a car passing, wind, the particular acoustic of an early Chicago morning, with the temperature below freezing and the city not fully awake yet. He heard her push through a door. I'm inside, she said. He exhaled. Stay there, he said. I'm 8 minutes out. He got there in 6. She was at a table near the back wall, facing the door, with her bag in her lap and her coat still on, and a cup of coffee she hadn't ordered. The person behind the counter had apparently just given it to her because she'd looked like someone who needed it, which said something about how she'd looked walking in. He sat across from her. He looked at her face. She was pale, which was unusual for her. Elena didn't go pale. She went still. But right now she was both. The man by the entrance followed me to the corner, she said, then stopped. He was marking your exit. Making sure you left the building. He watched her. He wasn't going to move on you in the street. Then what was he there for? The documents, he said. They want the original board filings. The injunction packet. He looked at her. Hargrove needs the original documentation to challenge the restructuring. If he can argue the documents were improperly filed or tampered with, the whole legal protection unravels. She set her coffee down. The originals are still upstairs. I know. Aldrich has people moving, he said. But Elena, the gap in coverage, the timing Kellner, getting loose, this was planned. This whole morning was planned. He waited for a window and he made one. He looked at her. He's moving right now. Everything is moving right now. She looked at him across the small table in the early morning coffee shop, with the barista moving around behind the counter and a few other early morning people with their laptops and their routines, the ordinary world doing its ordinary things around them. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him across every table, in 14 years clear, direct, with the particular focus that had always made him feel, when he was paying attention, that being seen by Elena was something that required you to be worth seeing. What do you need from me? She said. Not what do we do. Not tell me your plan. What do you need from me? The question of someone who has decided to be a partner in this rather than a protected bystander, which was its own kind of decision, its own kind of risk. Catherine needs to file a digital version of the injunction right now, he said. Not at 9. Right now, whatever form it's in. Can you call her? Elena already had her phone out. Yes. And the board documentation, Roger Blaine needs to be on record as of this morning affirming his position. He's solid, she said. She was already dialing. Roger doesn't run. Into the phone, Catherine. I need you to file whatever we have right now. Yes, now. Digital submission, emergency basis. Call Judge Harwick's clerk directly. She paused, listening. I know it's 6 a.m. call anyway. She hung up. She was already dialing again. Roger. It's Elena. I need you to send me a written affirmation of your board position, timestamped this morning, to my personal email. Yes, now. I'll explain the full situation in an hour. She hung up. She looked at Dante. Done, she said. He looked at her. He thought about Gino Ferretti, saying the Vercelli name means something, because people believe your house is in order, and understood now, finally, correctly. What that had meant, not that Elena's presence made the name look respectable, but that Elena's capability was what had been holding the actual structure together, the legal structure, the human structure, the 40 people who came to work at Vercelli-connected businesses and trusted that someone was paying attention to, whether the floor they were standing on was solid. Phone buzzed. Aldrich. We have eyes back on the River North property, Aldrich said. 2 individuals made entry to the Foundation office building at 6:04. Our people are moving in now. A pause, Dante. There's a 3rd individual we ran the plate on a vehicle parked on Huron. It comes back to a shell company, 2 layers from Hargrove. But the registered driver on the vehicle's insurance, Aldrich paused. Kellner. He's there, Dante said. He's there. Which means this morning. The loose Kellner that was cover. He was supposed to be loose. He was supposed to spook you so you'd warn Elena so she'd leave the building so they could access the documents. Aldrich's voice was steady but with an edge underneath. It was a play to get her out. Dante looked at Elena across the table. It worked, he said. We know. Our people are in the building now. We'll contain it. A pause. But Dante, Hargrove's main operation, the transfer filings his lawyers started this morning, we've frozen 3 accounts, but there are 2 more we can't get to without a specific piece of documentation. What piece? The Meridian Street property contracts. We need the originals or certified copies showing Vercelli controlled those assets before Hargrove's people filed the competing claim this morning. If we don't have documentation he checked something, by 10 a.m., when the claim hits the court clerk's office, we lose the ability to freeze those accounts today. Dante turned to Elena. The Meridian Street contracts. Where are the originals? She didn't hesitate. In the 3rd drawer of the filing cabinet in my office. Hanging files labeled property management, sublabeled by street. She paused. But my office is in the building where Kellner and 2 other people just... Aldrich, Dante said into the phone. We need access to a specific filing cabinet in the Foundation office as soon as your people have secured the space. We'll need someone who can identify the specific documents, Aldrich said. Someone with legal authority over the files. That's me, Elena said. She'd heard the whole exchange, clearly. She was already standing up. It's me, and I'll go. Dante stood. You're not going back into that building while Kellner is... Aldrich said his people are moving in right now. She looked at him. By the time we get there, the space will be secured. and I am the only person who has legal authority over those files, which means I am the only person who can hand those documents to a federal agent in a way that holds up. She held his gaze. Dante. We have 3 hours and 40 minutes. He looked at her. She was right. She was completely right, and she knew it, and she was not asking his permission. I'm going with you, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Fine. But you drive because I need to be on the phone the whole way. They walked out into the early Chicago morning together, not side by side in any romantic sense, not with any of the architecture of the life they'd had, but with the particular closeness of two people running toward the same thing at the same time, which is its own kind of proximity, different from all the other kinds and not less real. The federal agents had the building secured by the time they arrived. Aldrich met them on the sidewalk in person, which told Dante how seriously this morning was being weighted. Kellner was in custody. The two other individuals were in custody. The building was being processed. Aldrich looked at Elena. Miss Vale, he said. He used her maiden name, which she had never legally changed, but which most people didn't know she used professionally on legal documents. He'd done his research. Aldrich, she said, 3rd floor. My office is on the left. She moved toward the entrance. He matched her pace. You understand we'll need to document everything you hand us. I understand evidentiary procedure, she said. Let's go. Dante followed. The office had been accessed, a filing drawer pulled, papers disturbed, but Kellner's people hadn't gotten what they'd come for. The Meridian Street contracts were where Elena had said they were, in the 3rd drawer, hanging files, labeled with her small, precise handwriting. She went directly to them, pulled the correct folder without searching, handed it to Aldrich's associate, who bagged and tagged it with the specific efficiency of someone doing something they'd done many times. Elena stood in her disrupted office and looked at the pulled drawer, the scattered papers, the evidence of someone going through what she'd built with the particular violation of that. She didn't look wrecked. She looked the way she'd looked taking her ring off, like someone who fully understood the situation and is deciding what it means from a standing position. Then she looked at the window. The river north skyline. Gray morning, the city. Victor Hargrove, she said, to no one in particular. Came after 14 years of work with a fabricated document package, and 2 men with a pry bar. She turned. He thought I was a pressure point. Aldrich looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not softness. He wasn't the soft type, but recognition. You're not, he said. No, she said, I'm not. She looked at Dante. He was standing near the door. He'd been standing back, letting her work, which was the right instinct, and also the thing he should have been doing for 14 years in a different sense. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has spent the morning being afraid in a specific, undisguised way, and is now on the other side of the worst part of it. We need to go, Aldrich said. Both of you. I need full statements, and I need them before that court clerk opens this morning. Elena picked up her bag. She looked at Dante once more. After this, she said, it's going to be a very long day. Yeah, he said. Are you ready for it? He thought about the conversation with Aldrich the night before. The 40 minutes of plain accounting everything he'd built, everything he'd done, laid out without architecture or excuse. He thought about the shape of what came after that, the legal process, the cooperation, the things that would need to be said in rooms with federal attorneys, and the particular exposure of a man handing over the full picture of 30 years. He thought about the empty house, the dead Frisia, the vase Rosa hadn't refilled. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. She walked out. He followed. Behind them, Aldrich's people moved through the office with their evidence bags and their documentation, methodically processing the remnants of the morning. Victor Hargrove had planned for months and lost in 3 hours, and outside on Huron Street the city was fully awake now, indifferent as always, going about its business in the gray November light, while somewhere inside the legal machinery that Elena's had spent 14 years carefully building, the documents that would determine what survived and what didn't were making their way toward a federal courthouse at 9:57 in the morning, with 3 minutes to spare. The federal courthouse on Dearborn Street was a building designed to make you feel small, which was probably intentional high ceilings, marble floors, the particular acoustic of a space where sound traveled far and came back changed. Elena had been in this building before, for foundation business, for filing, once for a deposition related to a zoning dispute involving one of the legitimate properties. She had always moved through it efficiently, with the particular ease of someone who understood procedure and didn't find institutions intimidating. She moved through it differently now. Not slower, if anything faster, because there was a deadline, and the deadline was real, and the documents in Aldrich Associates' evidence bag needed to be processed and filed before 10 a.m. and it was 9:57. But differently. With the weight of everything the morning had been sitting somewhere in her chest, not heavy enough to slow her down, just present. The way a bruise is present, you don't think about it until you move a certain way, and then you know it's there. They made the filing at 9:59. Catherine Maris was already in the building she'd driven from her office on Michigan Avenue at 7 a.m. when Elena had called, arriving with her reading glasses on and her briefcase and the focused expression of a woman who had been a lawyer for 30 years and understood that some mornings required you to simply show up and be completely competent without commentary. She handled the filing. She spoke to the clerk. She spoke to the federal attorney Aldrich, head coordinating on the asset freeze. She did all of it with the specific quiet authority of someone who is very good at what she does and doesn't need anyone to notice. Elena watched her and felt something that was close to gratitude, but had more structure to it, the recognition of what it meant to have built relationships over years, with people who were genuinely capable, who showed up not out of fear or obligation, but because the work mattered to them, and they'd been given reason to trust that it mattered to her. 10:12, the asset freeze on Hargrove's 2 remaining accounts was confirmed. At 10:31, Victor Hargrove was taken into federal custody at his office in the Loop. Elena heard about the arrest from Aldrich, who called her cell while she was sitting in a hallway of the courthouse on a wooden bench with a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been made sometime the previous afternoon. She listened to Aldrich's account brief, factual, the minimum necessary, and said thank you and hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in her lap. Dante was down the hall in a room with 2 federal attorneys and a recording device and the full weight of everything he'd agreed to give them. He'd been in there since 8:45. She didn't know how long it would take. She didn't go to the door. She sat on the bench and drank the bad coffee and thought about Victor Hargrove being walked through his Loop office with people watching and felt nothing triumphant. That surprised her less than it might have once. She'd learned, somewhere in the last 3 weeks, that the things she'd expected to feel and the things she actually felt were often different, and that the actual feelings were quieter and less satisfying and more true. Catherine came and sat beside her at 10:45. Roger Blaine called, she said. He wants you to know the board met this morning by conference call and voted unanimously to affirm the Foundation's independent status and condemn the intimidation attempt against him. She paused. He used the word condemn. Roger doesn't use words like that lightly. No, Elena said, he doesn't. He also said Catherine stopped. She looked at her hands for a moment, which was unusual. Catherine Maris did not look at her hands when she was thinking. She looked straight ahead. He said he'd been a judge for 22 years, and he knew what it looked like when someone was trying to make an honest institution into a tool, and that he wasn't going to let that happen to something Elena had built. She paused. He said it like it was simple. Elena looked at the marble floor of the courthouse hallway. It is simple, she said. That's the thing. The right thing is usually simple, just not always easy. They sat together without talking for a few minutes, which was its own kind of conversation. Dante came out of the room at 12:17. He looked like a man who had been wrung out and set down, not broken. The structure was still there, but everything loose in it had been removed. He'd taken off his coat at some point, was carrying it over one arm, and his shirt was wrinkled at the collar in a way she'd never seen on him, because Dante had always been meticulous about that particular thing. He stopped when he saw her on the bench. She stood. They looked at each other across 15 feet of courthouse hallway for a moment. Done, he said. I know, she said. Hargrove's in custody. He nodded. He walked toward her and she stayed where she was, and when he got close enough to speak without raising his voice, he stopped and looked at her with the same expression she'd seen. The conference room of her foundation, that stripped back thing, the face without the management of it. They're going to want more sessions, he said. This is going to go on for months. Cooperation agreement is he stopped. It's extensive. I understand what that means, she said. I'm going to lose everything, he said. The operation, the properties, whatever's left of the network. There'll be asset forfeiture. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. There's probably going to be a period of time where I can't be in Chicago. She looked at him steadily. Are you going to be all right? He considered that. She could see him actually considering it, not reaching for the automatic answer. I don't know yet, he said. I think so. Eventually. She nodded. That's an honest answer. I'm trying to be honest, he said. It's a brief sound that was almost a laugh, dry and without humor. Turns out it's harder than lying, which I didn't expect. I've been lying about things for so long, I thought I'd forgotten how. She looked at him. You haven't forgotten, she said. He looked at her. No, he said. I haven't. They stood in the hallway of the federal courthouse, with the marble floor and the high ceilings and the sound of institutional business going on around them. And there was something between them, in that moment, not reconciliation. Not the warm return of what had been. Because that wasn't what this was, and both of them knew it, but something real. The specific reality of two people who had been through something together and were standing on the other side of it, changed in ways that hadn't fully shown themselves yet. What happens to you now, he said. The foundation continues, she said. The board is solid. The assets are protected. The injunction went through this morning. She paused. I'm going to spend the next 6 months making sure everything that was worth building is actually built to stand on its own, without my name being necessary for it, without anyone's name being necessary. He nodded slowly. And after that, she said, I don't know yet. I have options I didn't have before. She paused. That's a strange thing to say, but it's true. He looked at her. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Elena, I'm not going to ask you to... He stopped. He started differently. I know what I did. Not just Celeste. All of it. The years of not looking. The things I built that I let sit too close to everything you were trying to keep clean. He paused. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't... Dante, she said. Stopped. I heard you the first time, she said. And the second. She looked at him with clear eyes. Tired eyes. The eyes of someone who had been awake since 5 a.m. after 4 hours of sleep and had spent the intervening hours in motion. You don't need to keep saying it. What you did today, what you decided last night, that said more than the apology does. She paused. See it. I want you to know I see it. He held her gaze and something moved through his expression that he didn't try to manage. She saw it the way you see something when you're finally actually looking, and she thought that this exact moment was the thing she would remember from all of it. Not the ring on the table. Not the conference room. Not the courthouse hallway. This the moment Dante Vercelli stopped managing what his face showed and let her see what was actually there. It wasn't pretty. It was grief mostly. The specific grief of a man who has spent a long time building the wrong thing and has just finished watching it come down. But it was real. Take care of yourself, she said. Whatever comes next, take care of yourself. She picked up her bag and her coat. She walked toward the courthouse exit. She didn't look back, not because she was making a statement, but because she had said what she meant to say, and there was nothing left that required her presence in that hallway. She pushed through the heavy door into the November air, which was cold and clean and sharp in the way Chicago November air always was, and she stood on the courthouse steps for a moment and breathed it. Then she went to work. The months that followed were not clean. That was the thing people don't tell you about the aftermath of something large, the way it doesn't resolve into a clear new chapter, but instead trails into a long, complicated middle section, where the legal processes grind along, and the practical consequences arrive in irregular waves, and the emotional accounting happens not all at once, but in small installments at inconvenient moments. The federal investigation into Hargrove's network ran for 8 months. Dante's cooperation was, by all accounts from Aldrich and the federal attorneys involved, significant. The connective tissue they'd needed, the specific details that turned a prosecutable case into an airtight one. Hargrove was indicted on 43 counts. 7 other individuals connected to his organization were indicted alongside him. Perry Lund, whose cooperation had been extracted in stages, received a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. Kellner went to trial and lost. Dante's own legal situation was complicated in the way these things are always complicated, shaped by the extent of his cooperation, the specific nature of what he'd admitted to, the judgment calls of federal attorneys who had objectives of their own that didn't always align with any individual's interests. He was not, in the end, imprisoned. What he received was a lengthy cooperation agreement, extensive asset forfeiture, a period of supervised release, and the requirement to relocate outside of Illinois for a minimum of 3 years as a condition of the agreement. He was, in the legal sense, lucky, which was itself a function of how much he'd given and how willingly he'd given it. He sold the house on North Burling Street in February. Rosa came in on the last day before the sale closed to clean the entry table. She put a single white freesia in the vase. She left it there for whoever came next, or maybe for the house itself, which had held enough history that some acknowledgement seemed right. Dante was not there when she did it. He'd already left Chicago. Elena heard about the house sale from Marcus, who had stayed in touch with her not frequently, not with any agenda, just occasionally, the way someone does when they respect a person and want to know they're all right. Marcus had left the organization before the federal process concluded, exiting cleanly and with Dante's knowledge, going to work for a legitimate security firm in the western suburbs. He seemed, from what Elena could tell in their brief exchanges, like a man who had wanted out for longer than he'd admitted to himself and was relieved to have been given a clear reason to go. He took very little, Marcus said, about the house sale. Some clothes, books, the photograph from his desk. A pause. He left the art. Said it wasn't his. Elena thought about the art she'd selected most of it over the years, because Dante had trusted her taste without particularly engaging with the choosing. She thought about the garden. She thought about the entry table vase. Where is he, she said. Colorado, Marcus said, small town. He didn't say which one. A pause. He said to tell you the Foundation's Q3 numbers were in the Tribune. He saw them. He said you should be proud. She was quiet for a moment. Tell him I said thank you. He knows, Marcus said. The Foundation's Q3 numbers were, in fact, in the Tribune, a small piece in the business section about the Vercelli Foundation's rebranding as the Vail Foundation, operating under its independent board, having disbursed in its first year of full independence more than it had in any single previous year. The reporter had interviewed Roger Blaine, who was characteristically precise and understated, and Adrian, who was unexpectedly eloquent about what it meant to work somewhere that prioritized the right things, and Catherine Maris, who said simply that the legal structure was sound, and left it there. Elena had not given an interview. She'd been asked 3 times and had said no each time, which caused the reporter to note in the piece that Miss Vail preferred the work to speak for itself, which was accurate enough. She read the piece at her desk in the Superior Street apartment on a Tuesday morning in March, with the lake visible through the north windows and the city doing what it always did. Then she put the paper down and went back to what she'd been working on, which was a proposal to expand the Foundation's Family Services program into 2 additional neighborhoods, the Pilsen area, and a section of the South Side where she'd been in conversation with community organizers for 6 months. At 11, Patricia called. Devin passed his CPA exam, Patricia said, with the particular warmth of someone sharing genuinely good news about someone they were rooting for. He found out this morning. Elena felt something ease in her chest, small, specific, real. Tell him, I said, congratulations, she said. And tell him the offer to discuss the Foundation controller position is still on the table if he wants to talk. He's going to want to talk, Patricia said. He's been asking about it for 2 months. I know, Elena said. I've been making him wait long enough to make sure he actually wants it. She paused. Not long enough to make him think I don't mean it. Patricia laughed a real laugh, the kind that comes from someone who understands the distinction. Tell him. Elena hung up. She looked out the north window for a moment. Then she went back to the proposal. She met Celeste once in April. Not planned a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. Elena there for a meeting with a grant committee member who'd canceled at the last minute. Celeste there for whatever Celeste was there for. They saw each other across the room at the same moment, which removed the option of deciding whether to approach. They sat. Not at the same table, at adjacent tables, turned slightly toward each other, close enough to speak without raising their voices, and with the particular distance of people who have something to address and are going to address it, like adults. Celeste looked different, not worse different. Something had come out of her face that had been in it before. Some performance, some version of herself that she'd been presenting. She looked tired in a way that was honest. I didn't know what Diane was doing with it, she said. Before hello, before any lead-in. Just said it. Elena looked at her. I know, she said. Celeste blinked. You know, the federal investigation established the timeline. You stopped talking to Diane in October. The information she was passing to Hargrove's people stopped changing after that. It became static, older information, which is why Hargrove moved when he did. He knew his intelligence was going stale. Elena paused. You figured out something was wrong with Diane, and you cut her off. You didn't know what to do with that, so you did the thing that actually mattered, which was stop talking to her. Celeste was looking at her with an expression that was hard to read, not relief exactly. More like someone who had been braced for a certain kind of conversation and found themselves in a different one. I should have told someone, Celeste said. Yes, Elena said. You should have. She stopped. She started again. I was ashamed. Of the whole thing. Of what I'd been doing, of what I'd said to Diane, of the fact that I'd been talking about your life like it was. She stopped again. Like it was a situation you were adjacent to, Elena said, rather than a person's actual life. Celeste looked at the table. Yes, she said quietly. Elena picked up her coffee. She looked at Celeste, a woman who had made choices she probably couldn't fully account for, who had wanted things she'd gone after in the wrong way, who was sitting here now in a coffee shop in April, looking like someone in the middle of figuring out who she was when the situation she'd been defining herself against was no longer available to define herself against. What are you doing now? Elena said. Celeste looked up. What are you doing? Work. Life. What are you doing? Pause, as if she hadn't expected the conversation to go here. I took a position with a nonprofit. Public Health Outreach West Side. She looked slightly uncertain about saying it. Start next month. Elena nodded. Is it what you want? I don't. She stopped. I think so. I think it might be. She looked at Elena. It's very different from what I was doing before. Good, Elena said, simply. Not cruelly, just as a fact, the way you say good when something is actually good and doesn't require elaboration. They talked for 20 more minutes. Not about Dante, he didn't come up, and Elena didn't bring him up, because he wasn't what this conversation was about. They talked about the West Side nonprofit, and about a book they'd both apparently read and disagreed about, and about the coffee, which Celeste said was overrated and Elena said was fine. It was, by any measure, a strange conversation, and also a strangely ordinary one. Two women in a coffee shop in April, with their complicated histories sitting underneath the surface of it, and neither of them pretending otherwise, and neither of them drowning in it either. When Elena left, she walked out into the April afternoon warmer. Now finally, Chicago releasing its grip on winter with the particular reluctant generosity of a city that has made you earn the good weather, and she thought about what Celeste had said. She was ashamed. She thought about shame and what people do with it, how some people build walls out of it, and some people build excuses, and some people, occasionally, do something hard or sit with it until it becomes information rather than armor. She didn't know what Celeste would do with hers. That wasn't Elena's to know. In May, she got a letter. A physical letter, handwritten, postmarked from a small town in Colorado that she didn't recognize. The handwriting was Dante's. She would have known it anywhere. 14 years of reading his signature on documents had made it as familiar as her own, and it was 3 pages long, which was more words than she'd ever seen him, put on paper voluntarily in the entire time she'd known him. He didn't ask her anything. He didn't request anything. He described in the plain and slightly clumsy way of someone who had decided to be honest at the expense of being articulate what his days looked like. He was working for a property management company, a real one, a small operation, no criminal component, a man named Gerald who was 68 years old and had been doing this for 40 years and who had, apparently, no idea who Dante was or had been and had hired him because he showed up on time and paid attention. He was living in a 1-bedroom apartment. He had learned in the absence of anyone to do it for him that he'd been making coffee wrong for 30 years and that the correct ratio was different from what he'd always used. He wrote, I looked up what Frisia smells like. I found a description online, but descriptions are not the same as the actual thing. I think that is probably true of most things I spent a long time being satisfied with descriptions of. She read that sentence twice. He wrote near the end, you were not someone I had to keep. You were someone I had to deserve. I did not deserve you. I am not writing this to ask for anything or to suggest that the accounting comes out differently because I understand it now. I'm writing it because it's true and because I spent a very long time not saying true things and I'm trying to practice. She set the letter down on her desk. She sat with it for a while. Then she got a piece of paper, her own good paper, the heavyweight stuff she used for correspondence that mattered, and she wrote back. Not long. 2 paragraphs. She told him the foundation's expansion proposal had been approved, that Patricia's team was doing good work, that Devin had passed his CPA exam. She told him Chicago in May was, as always, worth waiting through winter for. She told him that she was well not as performance, not as social convention, but as a factual report from someone who had taken stock and found the inventory honest. At the end, she wrote, You asked once, in the conference room, for time to figure out how to deserve me. I said that wasn't how it worked. I still think that's true. But I think trying to deserve the life you're living, whatever that life is, wherever it is worth doing. I think you know that now. I think that's enough. She addressed the envelope. She looked at it for a moment, the Colorado town she didn't know, the unfamiliar street dress, the name she'd written without the title he no longer carried. She sealed it and set it by the door to mail in the morning. She went back to her desk. She pulled up the expansion proposal. She read through the section on the Pilsen program, made 2 margin notes, sent an email to the community organizer she'd been working with a woman named Rosario, who was sharp and had no patience for anything that wasn't going to actually help people, and who had said, at their first meeting, that she'd heard of the Vercelli Foundation, but wasn't sure what she was getting with the Vale Foundation. And Elena had said, "You're getting the parts I was always in control of." And Rosario had said, "That'll do." And they'd gotten to work. She worked until 8. She went to the window. The lake was dark and the city was lit, and the spring night had the particular quality of Chicago, at this hour alive, dense, layered with the lives of several million people doing whatever they were doing, all of it simultaneously, none of it asking her to participate, all of it available if she chose to. She was 42 years old. She had built something that could now stand without her name on the door. She had left a marriage that had made her invisible. She had navigated a crisis that would have undone most people by doing what she always did. Paying attention, preparing, being more organized than anyone who underestimated her expected. She was not healed, exactly. That was too clean a word, too final, too much like a destination. She was something less resolved and more alive than healed she was in the middle of things, which was where she'd always operated best. In the middle of the Pilsen proposal. In the middle of figuring out what 42 looked like when you were building it for yourself. In the middle of understanding that the things she'd thought she was carrying, for Dante, had turned out, many of them, to be things she'd wanted to carry anyway, just for different reasons, in a different name. She thought about Dante in a 1-bedroom apartment in Colorado, learning the correct coffee ratio, working for a man named Gerald who didn't know who he'd been. She thought about that and felt something she didn't try to name, because naming it would have flattened it. And she had learned finally to let the complicated things be complicated without forcing them into a shape she could file. She pulled the window closed against the spring chill. She went to make coffee the correct ratio now. She'd looked it up months ago, in the early weeks in this apartment when she'd had time to notice small things, and had found that noticing small things was not the diminishment she'd feared, but something closer to the opposite. She made the coffee. She brought it back to the desk. She opened the proposal and went back to work. In the lamplit apartment on the 14th floor of a building on Superior Street that was entirely hers, in a life that was entirely hers, quiet and complicated and full of things worth doing, stretching out in every direction she chose to look.